Welcome, Magan. Thank you so much for joining us and taking out the time to speak with us. How are you today?
Absolutely fine, Mohan, and thank you for having me. Always glad.
Fantastic. So let's start from the very beginning. You were born and brought up in Delhi.
Born and brought up in Delhi, all schooling here, college in Bombay, and then further studies happened abroad.
Okay, so let's talk about your schooling. Let's talk about from the very beginning. How were the days of schooling? Where did you go? How did you go about selecting the subjects during your 11th and 12th? How did the decision of career making come about? Take us through the whole journey of your schooling days.
Well, I was a studious boy, a topper all throughout. Did very well in studies, and non modesty. So when the 10th boards happened, I scored exceedingly well. My parents believed that if you score well, then it's either engineer or doctor because they're guaranteed professions. This was 94, 95. We didn't know any better. I knew nothing but to follow what my parents told me. Although there was someone at teacher at school who did a psychometric analysis and said Magan is meant for arts, he's suited for arts, history, geography, and
Wow.
artistic pursuits and endeavors. My parents said, no, he'll persevere and he has to be in science. So I chose science. I did well in science. I thank them because it gave me a logical bent of mind. But long story short, what I do today, something in my life is artistic and not scientific.
So at that point in time, also, you went through psychometric analysis and assessments. That's really impressive.
We were an anomaly of a school. We had one person who was doing it maybe as a trial to see where it goes. It was early days, which is why maybe it wasn't taken so seriously. And it was weighed out in favor of careers that seemed more lucrative.
Right,
Engineer, doctor, lawyer.
right. So your parents at that point in time wanted you to become an engineer.
They said if you score well, there is no need to do any other stream but be in one of these three. And because they felt it was guaranteed job success.
Right.
And again, they weren't wrong in their thinking. I didn't know any better, and I chose those fields. 11th and 12th, I did well in school, but was I enjoying myself? I don't think so.
So how did you go about selecting your subjects in 11th? Just because you were doing very well academically, you were scoring very well. I'm sure you must have scored fantastic during your class 10th also. And hence you decided automatically to pick up science and LCN?
That's right.
That's right.
Pretty much where it's at. That's pretty much
Mm.
what happened.
And when you were studying in your 11th and 12th, you were saying that your heart wasn't there. However, you were doing well on books. You were scoring in your examinations, and you performed really well in your 12th boards as well.
So still got a 95 plus PCM, did all that very well.
Mm.
But was this my calling? And then I remember having to sit for the entrance exams, which was very grueling a task. You've just finished your boards, everybody else is partying, but you're sitting for another 2 months studying 17 hours, 16 hours, or
Right.
at least 10 hours a day trying to figure out the entrances. That's when I think I cracked. And I said, why am I doing this? And I said, okay, I'll do it to please my parents. But once I was through and I'd qualified, I said, this is not what I want.
So how did you go about deciding at that point in time that this is what I want to do? And what was the whole conversation about with your parents?
So the conversation was, this is what I do not want to do.
Okay.
I don't know what I want to do.
Okay.
But at that time, my preparation for IIT and such had prepared me for subjects which also allowed me to do the hotel management entrance exam. So I took that and I did well, and hence I chose the stream maybe out of rebellion, actually.
Oh.
I don't think I knew in my mind I'm going to be a sommelier or a wine taster, but I just knew I did not want to be an engineer.
Oh.
And that is where it started. That it was so much hatred for having done this that I said, I'm done with this. I'll do anything else but this.
So when you decided for hotel management and you did really well, you were among the top rank holders, cracking that examination. While you were going to the hotel management program, did you realize that this is the place where you belong, or even during that program also finding yourself was happening?
I joined hotel management and I came back to again being the topper. I scored the highest in culinary, excessive practicals across India, got a scholarship in the first year. I scored the highest in food and beverage the next year across India. So so clearly I was in my element to an extent. I was enjoying something new. I talked to my engineering friends regularly, and they were either copying each other's assignments or doing something which I didn't really care much for. Again, they've done well in their lives, I'm sure. But for me, I was enjoying, and I think I was discovering myself then. And I can tell you that in the first year I chose cooking, but after my training in a hotel, I realized that nobody respects cooks. And this is 98. I'm talking, there were no celebrity chefs, there was no master chef.
Right.
So I said, I don't want to be in the back of the house. I want to be front of the house where people can meet me.
Okay.
I think that finishing school or grooming, that hospitality became a grooming school for me. And my personality came out much better than it might have under some other stream.
Right. So, how did you come about becoming a sommelier?
That's a bit of a long journey. So you study in India, you study books, you study alcohol in IHM, and the biggest problem is you will not sip one thing all through your 3 years. So you read everything about gin, whiskey, vodka, wine,
Right.
but you've never sipped anything. So when I went abroad to study in France, why did I choose France over the US? Because by the time I'd broken the first one of not doing science and doing this, I started breaking all laws. And I said, I will live by my bucket list. And the bucket list says I must speak French like the French do. So I went to France to study instead of the US. And in France, I realized if you want to speak French, you have to understand food and wine.
Right.
And hence I got into food and wine again in France.
So, food and wine is very much a part of French culture.
Someone told me, if you wish to speak Hindi properly, you have to respect Bollywood, politics, and traffic.
Yeah.
You'll speak Hindi with a more local understanding. If you want to respect French culture, you have to understand food and wine very well.
Okay.
And that is very innate to their culture. By working in wine, by learning how to make wine, by making wine and tasting it, I think it opened up a lot more sensibilities in me to speaking French like a native speaker.
So, at that point in time, I want to understand what was your frame of mind when you have done really well in your hotel management program. You must have gotten a great placement. You were leaving all of that secured, stable job and a career, and again you were moving out of the box, so to say, and you were picking up, which was not at all heard of at that point in time in this country. And you were looking at doing completely new thing of becoming a wine taster or sommelier.
So by the time I did well in hotel management, my father and mother became my biggest support system. They realized why I was not meant for science, or why I could be science but not. And they said, son, you will always have a roof over your head and food on your table. Use this financial security as a trampoline to go higher, do something different. So don't do the same thing as your friends are doing. Think of what else you wish to apply yourself to. So if you have to do a course in wine that will cost us extra, and if we can afford it, go for it. We don't know what the outcome is, but that became my strength that my parents by now believed in.
Wow, very nice. So at that point in time, actually zeroing in on a wine tasting course, how did that go about? Because I'm still not able to figure out.
I was working in France. As I got to France to study masters in hospitality.
Right.
Once I finished that, I was working in Paris. And at that time, September 11th happened. So we would need to all be told to go home. We were all told to go home because, with September 11th, there was no travel, no tourism. So they said, all foreigners, please return home.
Okay.
I looked for the best wine school in France. I found a school. I wrote to them. They said, apply in French. Applied in French, and they said, we will select you, but we don't guarantee you success because your French is not good enough. Do you still want to come? I asked my parents. They said, finish it and don't come back till you're done. So I went for the French course in a small little village in France where there was no option but to eat, live, drink, think French.
Okay.
I was the only brown-skinned person for a 45-kilometer radius. They had no idea where I was from.
Which village was it?
It's called Suze-d'Arus. It makes no sense. It's 1 hour from Lyon, 1.5 hours from Lyon.
Okay.
City.
Yeah.
It's middle of nowhere. And there was a castle, which is the wine university. So I studied there in French. And then obviously I learned French and wine at the same time. And when I qualified, I got a diploma from the Agricultural Ministry of France, which allows me to work there as like a pharmacy, like a doctor. These are legit recognized diplomas, and like a pharmacist, sorry. And I could now work in France. One difference is at that point is when I chose not to work there but come back to India.
So just help us, it will help a lot of our students and viewers as well that, what is the history of wine and, if you talk about France and wine and the whole history of origination of wines, and coming along till now, how wine has evolved over the period.
Very simply put, alcohol has always been a part of our society. Whether we like it or not, we've always had alcohol. Whether it's fermented or distilled, it's been there. Wines were made in Europe. we didn't grow wines. Why? Because their soils are infertile, so they can grow nothing else but grapes, and grapes can be converted to wines, especially those grapes which are not table grapes.
Okay.
India had fertile soils, so we had cash crops, wheat, rice, paddy, so
Right.
all everything else, tobacco even. So we didn't need wine at that time. Also, wine was subsistence for them. If you drink wine, it's an antibacterial, it's a digesting, helps your system. So it's culturally a part of their diet, so to say. And now they've evolved that into the largest export for France and the largest industries for them. So to learn from them is to learn from thousands of years of history being distilled down to knowledge today. India's industry now is 25 years old. I've been a part of it, but we're still learning.
Right.
We're learning our soil, we're learning our climate, we're learning our consumer. We're learning at all angles. In France, we learned the soil and the climate over thousands of years. So now we're only learning the new consumer.
Right.
So it was good to learn there. I did it in French. I spent time in Italy and Spain also after that to learn other aspects of winemaking. And after that, I've been in Australia and California. And I've realized the more you learn, the more humbling it is. At the end of the day, the world of alcohol is to be respected. It's not about getting drunk. It is about the civility of drinking. And that's where today I work. The civility of drinking.
Okay. Okay. So once you completed your master's in hospitality and then you finished your course diploma in wine tasting, what happened post that in your career?
So just one quick thing there. I did all the stuff that is towards the sales aspect of it. I was a sommelier, which means I could come from an art stream, commerce stream, and I can be a sommelier.
Okay.
I'm tasting a finished product and telling the consumer how it is.
Okay.
Many people want to be wine makers or beer makers or whiskey makers. Those are science subjects.
Right.
So if you wish to be one of them, you need to know science. You need to know biology. You need to know all those sciences. So I could...
Chemicals and everything.
You need to know all that. Chemistry, the reactions, you have to understand them at a very high level of proficiency.
Right.
So I had chosen all the fields on this side, which are artistic. Although coincidentally, I could have gone to the other side because I have a science background.
Right.
Having said that, today I've spent time on both sides of it. But it's always good for people to know that I chose the artistic side and went to the tasting, and that's which way.
So for the benefit of all the viewers, if we could define exactly who is a sommelier.
In French, a sommelier is roughly a taster, a person who will taste and tell you if it's good or bad. In Ramayana, Shabri eating the bear before giving it to Ram is also technically a taster. So I always say she was possibly the first sommelier we ever hear of in India. But if I taste and then I tell you what the product is, and then I decide out of these four which is best for you or you will like the most, that is what a sommelier does. Maximize the enjoyment of the consumer while maximizing sales for the outlet. So we're all at the front end. What product is made, we bring it to the right consumer.
So when we think of wine, what are the typical characteristics of a wine that, a sommelier is talking about?
The first one will be the acidity or the crispness, which means how sour it is. Another important one is how fruity it is, because it's got different flavors coming in. And the last one would be how bitter it is. And those three are a balance. Now, when I talk to you, if you go to your tailor and you say, I want a suit, he can't make you a suit. He or she will ask you questions. Do you like blue? Do you like orange or rust? Do you like stripes? Do you like herringbone? And based on those, they narrow down. The same thing as sommelier does. I will ask you, do you like eating this? Do you like eating that? Do you like strong flavors, mild flavors? Do you like... And then based on those things, I will distill down and tell you, this is, I think, the wine you should try. And if you like it, based on that, I will tell you other wines. That is what a sommelier actually does.
Yeah.
And based on that, I will buy wines for the outlet or the hotel, depending on what sells in that area.
What sells.
So I can't make the same wine list in London as in Delhi. Different consumers.
Right. And we also get to hear it's a dry wine or it's a full-bodied or...
Absolutely. So all part of those three things, acidity, tannins, and the fruitiness together, when they all go high, you've got a full-bodied wine. When they are low, you're talking about medium-bodied or light-bodied wines. And dryness is the measure of sugar. When there is no sugar in the wine, like in our coffees, it's a dry wine. When there is some sugar, we call it off-dry, semi-sweet, and sweet.
Right.
Three different words.
Right. And the names of the wines are typically the grapes that we are talking about.
So in France, they name them by the region because it's such an old thing. They say, if you know the region, you know the grape, so let's go by the region. But in the new world, they go by the grape because they think it's easier to put the ingredient on the label.
Right. So Burgundy is an area.
That's right.
And that's how it is named.
In France, they say Burgundy.
Right.
I assume everybody knows
Yeah.
it's Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Yeah.
But if you go to California, they will write Pinot Noir.
Yeah, Pinot
Raw
Noir.
Chardonnay.
That's the
That's it. They will not
a lot, and so on.
absolutely. They'll write the grapes. Now, why? And the sommelier's job is to simplify all this for their consumer or their drinker and let people understand it better.
Right. So if we talk about, say, today's times, and if we talk of Indian context, how is the industry for sommeliers looking like? What kind of opportunities, for sommeliers exist?
That's a great question, Mohan. Like, you don't have to only work in a restaurant. That's the first submission I have. Just because you qualify as a taster, you don't work only in a restaurant. You can work with a retail shop or shops. You can work with an importer who brings in wine, and then you have to help them take it to other hotels and restaurants. You can work with hotels and train their staff on how to sell. A hotel at any point, any five-star hotels holding up 60 to 70 lakhs, up to 2 crores worth of wine stock. Average every year, 20-30% is going to spoil. So if you don't sell it in time in the right manner, you will lose stock.
So what do you mean by wines will get spoiled? So their expiry is,
Not
the shelf life is really...
not all wines are going to last 50 years.
Okay.
A substantial chunk is going to expire in 3, 4, 5 years. In a 2 crore stock, there'll be at least 10-20% that will expire next year or the year after. So that's where the sommelier applies themselves.
How is the life of a wine being decided?
That's the job of the sommelier. By tasting constantly, by working with winemakers, understanding what they are trying to make, you understand what they were wishing to do. If I want to make a wine for a nightclub as a winemaker, I don't want the wine to have a life of 50 years. Why a nightclub? You go, you're noisy, you drink it, it's well priced, it's cheap, you go home. But you're making a wine for a fine dining, it'll have a lot more to it. It can last after 10 years. If you open the bottle, it'll still be fine. So depending who I make it for, how I price it will decide many things about the life. And that's a sommelier's job. So you can work in the restaurant, you can work in a hotel, you can work with importers. You can also work now with Indian alcohol makers. Indian manufacturers of alcohol need someone to taste and tell consumers about their product, and a sommelier can be a great fix there as
well. Right. So if we talk of the wine makers in this country, I believe there are very, very few, 1 or 2 winemakers.
Well, luckily now we have some great institutes in India that are teaching people how to make wine, brew beer, so fermentation and distillation, all these arts can be learned here.
Right.
But I'm saying arts, but they're actually sciences.
Correct.
Okay, the application can be artistic, but the science is very, very definite.
The making is science.
Yeah, you have to know it, you can learn it, you can qualify, and then you work, and with this current startup culture, there are so many Indian brands coming up at an international level, world-class standards. You can work with any of them, start as an intern, learn how they're being made, and then brew with them and brew with them. And obviously, India's had seen a whiskey revolution. We've seen the gin revolution start already. Rum might be next. There are other spirits coming along. And there's suddenly we talk about the heritage liqueurs, which can be exploited after this.
Wow.
Mahuas, the Kesar Kasturis, the Royal Saffron, and all these. So the field is vast in India.
Are there any good wine tasting courses in the country?
Wine tasting courses, we are back to the artistic side. We still, sadly, are following the norms set by the West.
Okay.
So all the courses that have value in the eyes of hotels and restaurants, which are the potential employers, are courses that come from the US and from the UK. It's okay for now, but in the long run, I think this will need to change because our palates, our sensibilities, our needs are not the same. So I feel that local IHMs might eventually, once they start becoming more liberal about tasting alcohol, have their own courses tailor-made for Indian conditions in
Right.
Right now, we follow UK-US standards.
Okay. So now all the people who want to be sommeliers, they have to study abroad.
They have to study a course that comes from abroad. And it's a high-fee course. They're expensive. They don't even address Indian needs, to be honest, which is why I don't administer them anymore. But they're famous. They work and they exist.
Okay. All right. And, if you talk of the kind of salaries that they can expect.
How much can a sommelier earn? That's a great question. You could start as a management trainee or assistant sommelier in a hotel or a restaurant, and that would be about maybe 25,000-30,000 rupees a month. If you work with a standalone outlet, it might be significantly higher. And as you get to be a corporate beverage director, you would be definitely easily in 6 figures. And there might even be a component of percentage of sales beyond a certain point that you can earn from.
Right. So I think all the sommeliers who are working in the restaurants and in the hotels, they do get a fair bit of incentives.
75,000 a month is a given with or without incentives.
Great. So it's a good career choice.
It's a good start. And then it all comes down to not just your wine knowledge, but also your communication skills.
Right.
How well can you connect with your consumer and communicate to them the product? I think that is what will set you.
Right. If we talk of Indian consumers, how is the industry evolving? People are becoming aware about wines. They understand that wines have characteristics. They need to be, dwelling on the characteristics. They need to be picking up the wine in terms of pairing it with the right food and so on and so forth.
I think two things have really helped Indians in the last few years. The first is English knowledge, and knowledge of English is a language. We all speak English. 90% of the data on wines and beverages out there is in English online. And the second thing is travel. And when I say travel, I mean real travel, going to different countries, either for work or studies or vacation. And also virtual travel through Instagram and Facebook, when allows you to see new avenues. So I think that awareness in India has gone up, the curiosity has gone up, by virtue of which our knowledge is increasing. So people are curious to know more, try more, and that encourages the industry to have more coming.
Right. And would you also be aware of the data of the growth of, wine consumers year on year?
It was pre-pandemic, the lockdown, I would say we were still growing at a steady 30 to 25%. It dropped a bit in the last 5 years. So 2015, we were still clocking 30, 23% growth, which is including a lot, 60% based on domestic wines being proliferated better. After the pandemic, we've slowed down. And also in the last 2 years, 3 years, gins become very popular with the younger crowd, the younger set. Seltzers are becoming very popular. So they've sort of displaced wine a bit, but you'd still be healthy in the 20 to 23% range of growth.
That's a very, very good growth rate. If we were growing at 30% a year,
Yeah,
that's a phenomenal growth rate of wine numbers.
you used to looking at 400,000 people and such. Otherwise, if you look at whiskey, which might be growing at 0.5%, let's say, but there are millions and hundreds of millions of people drinking whiskey, the numbers are still larger there. But wine is where it's more refreshing, it's more knowledge-driven. It's also low alcohol, so there's a lot more civility to the consumption of wine than there is to whiskey and rum in a traditional sense. So wine and beer, I think, are the way ahead the moment in India, with the younger India.
Great. Wonderful. So when we look at, your journey especially, it seems to be really inspiring for a lot of children, who are watching and aspiring to be in the alcohol industry. So when did you decide to come back? And yes.
I came back for a very simple reason. That when I finished becoming a sommelier, I spoke French really well, but I was still a brown-skinned person in a white country, which was still not entirely accepting of a brown person talking about wine, which is fine. If today a white person tells me about chicken tikka, I will discount his or her knowledge because I will think I am Indian, so I know more. They might be acclaimed chefs, but we might have that stereotype. Also, I decided to come back because I felt India was going through this metamorphosis, and my knowledge would be better applied back here. And it wasn't easy. It took me a year to convince people that I'm a sommelier and not a Somalian from Africa, and that I have a career wherein I come and taste alcohol, and drinking alcohol on the job is not a bane. For me, I think my career has always been based around bringing civility to the consumption of alcohol, of showing people that everybody who drinks does not go home and beat their wives, does not spend all of their salary on alcohol. There's a lot of social connotation in a positive way to alcohol, and that's where I work.
So which year was it when you decided to come back and, you started to educate the country about?
I was in 4-5, right? 2005, it was 20 years now. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, I've gone back to Europe in the middle again and again, but 2004-5 is when I came here.
So since then, how has been your journey? So when you came back, you started talking about wine tasting, creating awareness and education on wines. At that point in time, were there a lot of wine importers?
First takers were some hotels who had foreign chefs or F&B managers who knew what a sommelier is, and they understood how I can help them establish SOPs to move the wine stock better. As I said, 30% can not expire, but start going bad every year. Having me help them move those stocks more efficiently and train the staff to speak better.
Right.
And that's where it started with hotels and restaurants. And from there, it went to the consumers and sessions happened. And I wrote books. I did a TV show around alcohol. It all organically came when it started with someone realizing the commercial viability of having a sommelier on their roads.
Right. Right. And if we talk about your, shift towards brewing and then, looking at all the other beverages, how that shift happened and
So I always say I'm a sommelier. I'm not a winemaker. I'm not a brewer. I'm not a mixologist. I'm not a distiller. Why? Because those are scientific skills, except the mixology. But this mixology is a hobby. I can mix drinks at home, but I'm not full-time doing it. But I delve in them. I'm curious. So even with brewing, I love to spend time with brewers and understand it and understand how they work. So I'm still not the cook, but I know what the finished product should taste like, and I can maybe tweak it a bit. And the journey has been fun because wine and beer are very similar, but very different at the same time. The connotation, people think beer is for simpler palates and wine is for complex palates, which is completely wrong. Beer can be equally complex. Beer can be equally difficult. In fact, beer has more hygiene issues than wine in many ways. It's been a fun journey, and I think there's a lot to learn still for me, and I enjoy that. And when you think your career has come to a plateau, and you've hit a glass ceiling somewhere, no, this whole new world opens up with brewing, and you're learning about a new beverage altogether.
right. So let's talk about beers. How how interesting is beer? What's happening in this industry? What are the trends looking like? What's the growth, consumption, growth pattern?
Me with Beer 91, I've learned a lot of new things. The first, that beer is a fast-growing beverage still. It doesn't always have to be the same beer that I drank when I was a teenager or 18, 19-year-old. It will be legally correct. Beers have evolved since then. They can be flavorful. There are hundreds of styles. No one's done them in India so far. So it's been a brave move to see how Beer 91 is getting them to the market. But at the same time, it's been a learning experience for me to understand how to communicate them to people. Because largely, a lot of the young people do not like bitterness. So they want sweet drinks or soft drinks, gentler flavors. So sometimes it's beer, sometimes it's cider, or it's... so with Beer 91, what I've realized is there is a whole new segment of beer. There's a whole new segment of beer, and beer doesn't always have to be a bitter, malty beverage. It can be flavorful, can have many aspects to it. And there has to be education always around it. People need to know what they're being given. It's a 10,000-year-old beverage. It has not died out so far. It will still go strong, but people keep reinterpreting the definition. So I won't say beer is better than wine or beer is worse than wine, but I would say they both have their place, as does whiskey and vodka and gin. But we need to spend time learning about it.
Right. So, if we talk about, brewing beer, obviously there's a science part of it and then there's an art part of it. If you could just explain and elaborate on both the things, please.
So always very important to remember that making a beverage involves a lot of scientific background. But how you apply that science is the art of it. So you and I can both learn to be brewers, but we will both, and with the same 4 ingredients, we will make completely different beers because artistically we are different. And we are both right. After we go to the market, if your beer sells more, your beer becomes more popular. My beer sells less, it becomes less popular. But it does not mean my beer is bad. It's still a good beer. It's just not to the popular taste.
Right.
So knowing to brew is one thing, but knowing what your consumer will like is the other part of it.
Sure. So if we talk of becoming a brewer, what is the process? How does one go about it?
I know I can't remember the name. There are some very fancy institutes that have now been operating for a good few years and churned out many brewers. And if you look at most of the microbrewers in India, the established commercial brewers, they've all studied from there.
Okay.
So it's a proud thing that today to be a good brewer, you do not have to go abroad and study. You can study in India and qualify to work.
So what are the typical eligibilities? How long is the program?
Again, because I haven't done it, but I know you have to. I think the science background definitely helps. They might accept you without that, but then you will struggle with all the chemistry of it. And there is a lot of chemistry involved.
Right.
So knowing science or coming from a science background is, I think, a basic prerequisite for studying how to be a brewer. And once you learn that, you need practice. You need lots and lots of practice because although beer is made with 4 ingredients, with each ingredient, there are so many options that there are hundreds and thousands of permutations and combinations. and you don't know how they work till you actually tried them.
Right.
And one last thing, once I've done that, microbrewing, which happens in the tap rooms and the microbreweries that we see, is a very different exercise from commercial brewing. It's
Okay.
like you cooking for four people at home versus industrial catering.
Right.
So you have to choose which field you are in and learn that better, because they are not interchangeable so easily.
Okay. So how is it different?
As I said, if I cook for 4 people at home, the amount of spices I use, I can't make the same dish for 100 people, because the ratios will not be just multiplied by 100. It changes in a different way. And you have to know that art even, and the equipment is
For commercial production.
commercial production. So it's the same science, but the application is different.
Right. Right. So if we talk of the consumption patterns and trends, how is it the market is growing?
Commercial brews will always be standard. They will make lagers, they'll make white wheat beers, they'll make simpler beers because they need volumes and they need to sell the beer. Beer has the shortest shelf life of all the alcoholic products out there. So you want to drink it fresh and you want to move it fast, and you're making millions of it, millions of bottles or thousands of cases. The commercial brewing will always play it safe first. Microbrews are where we get to experiment. So if you ask me, Morgan, I want to drink a special stout or an IPA or this, I will say come to a microbrewery and there are tap room and you will find lots of variety.
Right.
As those styles catch on, as they become more popular, then these recipes can be extrapolated and transferred to a commercial brew level and made for the masses. But to make a beer in a commercial brewery without knowing the market would be just suicidal.
Right. But if we talk of the consumption, growth, would you have the figures that how the market is growing?
Don't have the figures,
For
but I
beer
can tell you
consumers.
lager remains the largest segment. Having said that, in the last few years, the wit beer from the Belgian style wit beers, which Bira calls Bira White, and the other versions,
Right.
at the tap room, they also have the German versions. They are becoming really popular. Wheat beers, I think, are the next popular segment in India. In times to come, IPA or pale ales, which are the bitter styles of beers, will be the third segment. It'll be a distant third. So first two are lagers and wheat beers. Then you have these pale ales. And growing gradually in the distance will be light beers, low-calorie beers.
Right.
Low alcohol, low-calorie beers will be the next big revolution.
Right. So, if we talk in terms of the industry and the career prospects, the amount of jobs coming up in the industry, how do you see it panning out? Tremendous.
Just think that out of the top brands in India, for the longest time, there was only one or two big brands in the space. And in the last 10 years, you've had about 25 new brands enter. So all these brands, out of the 25, even if 12 survive, and I can tell you with Bira, at least, we have 5 breweries. They will maybe go to 6. Each brewery will need new brewers, and not just one, but a team of brewers. So there will always be space. And then they're opening tap rooms, which means more microbreweries.
Yeah, lots and lots of microbreweries. So I think that the palate for craft beers is also, developing and growing.
Absolutely. And we will all need brewers. There will all need people who know brewing, understand brewing, and know how to apply it. So with a system within a company, you will find ways to work in the commercial side, the microbrew side, get experience from experienced brewers. But I think it's a great industry to be in right now. Beer is growing really fast. And when I say beer, it's not just lager and wheat beers, but all sorts of beers, and especially through the microbrewery channel. So there's a lot to be experienced.
Right. So if I have to ask you, what are the 3 skills, top 3 skills that come to your mind to become a great sommelier? What would be?
I think the first one always, in no matter which field of alcohol you go, I think is knowledge. You cannot compromise knowledge. You have to know about your product, which is theoretical, and you have to know your theory. There is no cutting corners on that. The second thing I think that comes with it, I think, is humility. You have to, no matter how much you know, you have to always think that the person in front can still teach me something new today, or the product in my glass will teach me something new today. So you can never approach a product with a preconceived notion that I've tasted this 1,000,000 times, I know how it tastes. I've had Black Label 1,000 times, and the 1,001st time when I taste it, I will still come to it like I don't know it at all and see what it tells me. If it conforms to referees with 1,000 tastings, I'm happy. If it does not, I will always tell you what is in my glass. So you might tell me, Magan, this is a $1 million bottle of wine. But if my senses tell me there is something wrong, in all humility, I will accept that over your word and I'll humbly submit it. So knowledge combined with humility makes you solid. Then the last thing that you need is practice. You need to get out there and try and practice a skill 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, which makes you better. And when I say humility, humility also helps you listen to others better. When I said the person in front can teach you, so always be listening. Sommelier or a brewer is not about how well you can do things. It's about how well you can figure out someone's need and address it. So I think knowledge, humility, practice, I think are the 3 skills I would go with.
Yeah, and like you have had a phenomenal journey. One of the most successful people in the industry. And if children today, looking at aspiring to be one, and if they look at the whole journey, what could be some of the the pinnacles that they could touch if they really?
Today, I think it's a lot more acceptable to do a hotel management. They don't think you're going to become a bearer or a waiter if you do hotel management. You could be corporate heads. Think of the largest hotel chains in Asia, and you'll find a lot of the senior management are all Indians, because like Thais, Indians have hospitality built into our system. People walk in as kids, we serve them water, we check on them, have you eaten? It's a great thing we have going with the culturally. So I think hospitality is a field where we are built to excel.
Right.
We don't mind working a little extra, a few hours here and there. We put in the hard work, we get the results. So I think sky's the limit in hospitality, be it as a sommelier or a brewer or as a winemaker, whichever side we choose. I think we also have a great gastronomic culture, so our palates are very well endowed. None of us grew up with microwave food. We grew up with fresh food from the kitchens with a box of spices. So we know smells a lot better than our Western counterparts. We know spices. We know so many other things. So I think we are sort of genetically constructed and culturally imbued with all the qualities we need to be great at hospitality and tasting. And to apply it there today is a moment of pride, because no more is the consumption of alcohol as taboo as it was when I was choosing this career. So people and parents are more accepting, and I think that's the way forward. So I would encourage parents that do not be let down if you think your son or daughter wants to work in alcohol. Encourage them. I think encouraging them and supporting them is going to help them understand how to not abuse it. And come back to that word, the civility of it.
Lovely. Thank you so very much, Magan. Thank you. And I can see that you've just finished a new book.
Yeah. Now a little old, but it's still fairly fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, fairly fresh. When did you finish this book?
Well, actually 2018, but the pandemic, I couldn't do much with it. So 2018, I've been waiting with it. Now it's there. It's been in many colleges. It's not syllabus ever, but it's a fun way of knowing about alcohol. I wrote it for the non-drinker. So if the non-drinker can read it, then people who like alcohol should definitely.
The untold story of alcohol in India, yeah? The Indian spirit.
Yeah.
I think we will definitely do another episode with you. Let me give it a read. Let me finish it first.
Yeah.
And then we will have very, I would say, focused discussion on the book. And I'm sure it will be highly insightful and informative for our viewers, yeah?
Always.
Thank you so very much, Magan.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.